Hey everyone, today's video is about screening, and while this is an important concept, I haven't really had the opportunity so far to be able to show a really typical example of the basics of the tactic. So in front of you, you can see I'm playing Empire and I have Warriors of Chaos, and there's a Hellblaster volley gun as well as some other missile troops around, but that Hellblaster volley gun is directly opposed to my infantry. So I've begun by setting up the Warriors of Chaos in a forest to protect them somewhat with cover, but to the right, I've had to screen another unit that I want to get forward, my Forsaken of Slaanesh. So I've screened them with Chaos Warhounds, which are pretty much the typical screening unit. What's important is that you pick a unit that's cheap and faster than the unit that's behind what you're trying to protect. So in this case, Warhounds are very cheap. They're 35 points. For Vanguard for 5, I've got 7 this time because the other important issue is to be able to block line of sight to the unit that you're trying to protect. So I wanted to take 7 Forsaken of Slaanesh. So I've taken 7 Warhounds as well, which is only like 12 to 14 more points or something like that. So in the example here, you can see I've set up in this way right on the deployment line. Fortunately for me, Hellblaster volley gun is 24 inches, so I can start outside range. But what matters a lot is that, so this unit has Vanguard, so it's going to be able to get up fast in front of the Forsaken, but you've got to be able to make sure you block that ability for your opponent to be able to shoot through those lines of sight. So as you move forward, that'll become a bit easier to do. As you sort of close the angle, you'll be able to create more width by coming forward. But in general, you're trying to make sure that you don't get shot. So you've got to be able to make magic missiles and war machines like the Hellblaster only need to be able to see a small amount of the unit to be able to deal damage. In this case, I was lucky enough to win the first turn, and I was able to send those Warhounds up 7 inches to begin the game. And then from there, I was able to march 14 inches and make sure that I was doing a number of things. So firstly, continuing to block that line of sight to the unit I want to protect. So you can imagine that the Forsaken have come up behind the Warhounds to begin with. Secondly, you need to actually threaten these like soft targets like war machine crews, which are very fragile in old world, and say the 5 to 10 skirmishing missile troops situation that sort of comes around with lots of different armies. So Warhounds they're not going to kill a lot of them. They've got to be able to kill some for it to make a difference, or you could just throw them in. But if you just throw them into something that's going to chew them up, you're risking that overrun, the free overrun on your turn, which is a bit of a worry. So you've got to make sure that you're harassing, I suppose, without looking completely just blocking in the way. However, even if you just choose to block, sometimes that's better than doing nothing, and then you can flee through as well if you feel like the unit behind is resilient enough. In this case, this is how far my Warhounds got up. You can see from this photo pretty well that they're blocking the line of sight of the Hellblaster. So what ends up happening in the next turn, and this is an interesting issue with screening, is my opponent charged and made a pretty reasonable charge, but was only able to clip the Warhounds. So the issue here is that if my opponent just leaves them there, he can shoot them with the Hellblaster, which might not be doing anything else at all. If he doesn't kill them all, though, then the Warhound's going to run through and start to take out that Hellblaster anyway. So you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And what you're able to do if you use screening units well is force your opponent into trading their powerful unit with your unit. So Hellblaster's not going to shoot every turn. The first turns are where it's most valuable. 125 points versus 47 for mine there. And they're the types of trades you need to make in Warhammer. Once you're playing people of equivalent skill in list building and on the table, it's really about trying to make those trades. You're not going to win 20-0 against players who are both of the same level in those skills. And that I emphasize list building as well. Often there's a mistake if people in rules knowledge or list that means you lose. Something's got to die somewhere on the board as you sort of trade things that have some sense equivalent value. In this way, these greatswords attack my warhounds. And what ends up happening is the warhounds aren't, they don't get, they don't win. I lose a lot, and because of the combat, front ranks fighting front rank, but because the greatswords out initiative my warhounds, I wasn't able to fight back because I lost contact, and then I fled to the right, which was not necessarily such a bad thing. That meant that my Forsaken then had time to hit this unit in the side, which is what it was all about. And they're a bit of a powerhouse unit. These guys get D3 attacks each, the supporting and Furious Charge. The supporting attacks were coming through pretty strong. And then they were able to break that unit and keep running. They've collected them in the side, and they're able to then hit. They actually were able to finish off the Hellblaster in a moment of poetic irony. So I think what you're looking at with screening is making sure that it's a faster unit that's cheap, that can run ahead, making sure that you block those lines of sight, also having some ability to threaten and put your opponent in two minds where they're sort of thinking, well, if I don't charge, I'm going to lose some of my stuff. And it sort of shows you that the game can become very much a game of tit for tat once you're good at it. And in this case, having some other cheap unit that my opponent could throw at the Warhounds would have been good for him to be able to clear the decks with that and force some issues on my part. But for me, I was able to execute the plan perfectly with the unit of screening Warhounds, and this, even though they died in the end, you can imagine the Forsaken ripped through and got their points back and more. Thanks again for watching, guys. See you next time.